Ladies and gentlemen, we are back on our forum about green energy and sustainable electromobility. For the non-Romanians who joined before, or from the non-Romanians who are joining now, everything from now on is in English, so everybody will be able to interact. I want to say hello to my colleagues from different countries in the AUTOBEST jury. It was an excellent conversation with the Romanian authorities regarding the green energy and the electromobility. But we all know that this is not a Romanian phenomenon, not a Romanian story. It's an European, first of all, story. And I was thinking, and hopefully here we are, having three keynote speakers to an European and international level with three different presentations regarding this universe of electromobility, of transportation and environment. I will start with the first one, which is a dear friend, is a very dear member of the Man-Best Hall of Fame. As you probably know, all of you, Man-Best is our Hall of Fame dedicated to the brilliant top executives we have nowadays in the world. This is a lifetime achievement. I mean, once you become a member, you are a member. It's not like you can win a world championship eventually like Hamilton 8 times to become bigger than Schumacher. It's not about that. And Andy was having during his career very important milestones. He is recognized as the father of Nissan Leaf when he was working in the second in command in Nissan. And he also was running since 2 months before, he was running Aston Martin organization company. He is the author of the Centenary Beyond 100. He is the author of the famous sentence, I think Aston Martin is a 100 years old startup. There are many things he did. And what is crucially important for our forum is the fact that Andy was predicting years ago how a big manufacturer, for instance, Aston Martin, how can go to the electromobility. He also said in front of the AUTOBEST jury member, which was becoming public knowledge after this interview, that it should be a difference between someone starting to produce cars today and another one which is producing cars in the last 1 century. It should be a difference because that 100 years was not for nothing. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say hello, Andy, and welcome to our forum.
Dan, hi, how you doing? And I just want you to be sure that it still has pride of place in my office. So it's really kind to introduce me in such a great way.
Thank you very much. So now you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's really an honor to speak to you today on a subject that's actually now very close to my heart, which is the pathway for the global automotive industry to reach net zero carbon and net zero emissions. I hope you'll forgive me, and I hope that my 41 years in the auto industry qualifies me to be quite candid with you. The global automotive industry in general is an industry fundamentally challenged even prior to COVID-19. It's in a period of massive change, primarily driven by external factors forcing that change. Change is being driven by, I suppose, many influences, and it's hard to put any of them in order. But I would suggest that perhaps the most profound is the changing customer expectation. The most obvious is the emerging Gen Z consumers. This is the generation that precedes millennials and born between the late 90s and the early 2010s. They view cars more like appliances. Nearly 56% agree a car represents essentially no more than a means of transportation. Some 70% of Gen Z consumers don't even have their driving license yet, and up to 30% have no intention or desire to get one. In fact, Gen Z survey respondents actually ranked alternative reality, VR, and smart homes higher in interest than vehicles, even autonomous ones. However, the good news, those who make up Gen Z do see autonomous vehicles as an eventual reality, and some 60% believe that they will use autonomous vehicles by 2029. The implications of these insights are quite far-reaching, I think. The industry needs to immediately rethink how to excite Gen Z consumers and those that follow them about these transportation options. Automakers should not be, or should complement or replace attributes of car coolness, such as horsepower, towing capacity, and even fuel economy, with features such as productivity, shared time, or total experience. Gen Z has shown an early willingness to invest money and loyalty in brands that demonstrate an ability to align marketing with those new values synonymous with mobility culture. Take Madrid, for example, with more than 5,000 electric scooters available for on-demand use as a means of cutting down on traffic, noise, pollution, and parking issues. Young Spaniards flock to these options, and companies have increased the size of the fleet more than fivefold in the past year. Now, as I said, the changing customer dynamics are but one of the changes facing the auto industry. Technology, environmental considerations, and legislation are all imposing change. These Gen Z customer owners lead the charge towards the electric vehicle more than any other generation. Combine that growing demand with growing legislation and the technical push of new entrants, and you have the most significant disruptive influence on the auto industry since the horse gave way to the car. The auto industry is going zero emissions, and by zero emissions, what I'm really saying is EV. The speed of change was partially self-inflicted with the Dieselgate scandal, but the move to both clean up inner city air and human impact on the environment is an inevitable route of travel. The route to EV is more disruptive on the industry than any other event in its history, since it opens up the closed shop to newcomers. The technology is far simpler than the internal combustion engine, and the EV allows easier entry for the digital disruption led by tech giants. I give you Google have already built a self-driving EV, and Apple has long been rumored to make a play in this space. Ironically, despite the substantial overcapacity and the excess number of brands, the barriers to entry are lower than ever, hence the rise in the startup EV automakers in China and the United States. So we go into a decade of change. Legislators reflecting the demands of a changing generation that require clean transportation. Customers with new values and demanding changes in the way that we travel. Technology that is disruptive and a startup culture that is capable of wobbling the establishment. The auto industry will describe the trends in their normal four-letter acronyms, for example, CASE, connected, autonomous, shared, and emissions-free. This is superficially how the industry deals with the threat, but in reality, the investment in transforming the portfolio to EVs is enormous and will have a material impact on each car maker's bottom line over the coming years. Some manufacturers, for example, have guided us to expect a 30% reduction in EBIT to pay for the investments, and the reality might be even greater. And the change has started to gain real momentum. In 2019, the number of light electric vehicles globally reached 2.26 million, a 9% growth over 2018. This was a slowing over the previous 6 years, which was between 46% and 69% growth. The reason for this shift are due to decrease in sales in the second half of 2019 in the largest markets of China and the US. But even with the stagnant growth in the two largest markets, global EV sales still grew, largely due to Europe, which saw a 44% growth. This could be attributed to the introduction of WLTP, along with changes in national vehicle taxation and grants. Turning to public transport, forecasts indicate that approximately 40% of new city buses registered in Europe by 2025 will be BEV. Currently, the Netherlands has been the quickest to adopt electric buses in Europe, and globally, China is far ahead. The Clean Vehicle Directive, or CVD, will be one of the biggest drivers for the adoption of zero-emission buses across Europe. The CVD states that public authorities should procure a minimum number of zero-emission vehicles, the exact percentage of which varies by countries. The UK, along with richer European countries like Germany, have a slightly higher targets and others slightly lower. The CVT states that between 2021 and 2025, 45% of buses procured, for example, in the UK, should be clean, which increases to 65% between 2026 and 2030, and that 50% of clean buses should be zero emissions. Naturally, amid COVID-19, the outlook for 2020 global EV sales becomes more difficult. The preliminary EV sales data is, however, very positive, but keep in mind that as of 2019, only 2.5% of the world's passenger vehicles ran on electricity. This would suggest that we still have a long, long road ahead, and it will profoundly impact on our industry. That road is predominantly EV. I predict that the EV will consume any trends towards PHEV in the relatively near future, for duplicating technologies on one car simply doesn't make sense in the long run. Battery technology will evolve quickly through derivatives of lithium ion and eventually to solid state by 2030. Compared to where I personally started when developing the Nissan Leaf, the journey to affordable and usable BEVs is within sight. This is driven by the cost of battery cells and the previously unobtainable goal of $100 per kilowatt hour, where cost parity with gasoline engine vehicles is achieved, and this is now within reach. The way forward for fuel cell is less clear. It's always a technology that is ripe 10 years from now. However, I do see a case for fuel cells in trucks and heavier vehicles as we sit here today, but we should acknowledge that battery technology is progressing along the Moore's curve and continues to make the business case for fuel cell investment harder and harder. Moreover, I found myself increasingly drawn to e-fuels and synthetic fuels, fuels which are carbon neutral but allow manufacturers potentially to use their existing internal combustion assets. This development, I'm sure, will be led by the aero industry, where they have virtually no alternative on their journey to zero emissions. But I predict that we may see this technology piloted in future F1 cars, and I see it as a viable option for sports cars in the future, for example. My point is that while we must be single-minded in the journey to zero emissions, we must not be myopic. There can be almost no one in this industry more bought in to EV technology than I. I champion this technology in the development of the Nissan Leaf. However, while I expect the majority of 2030 sales to be EV, I still believe that we should not legislate EV. Rather, we allow a Darwinism approach to the technologies of zero emissions and enjoy the best of breed in each of the segments. Put another way, we should not let our politicians pick winning technologies. Let's be honest, they don't have a good track record with diesels. Rather, the politicians need to identify the problem to be solved and the engineers unleashed to identify the solution. Darwinism will define the fittest solution. Now, what about shared transportation? Somehow this is in lockstep with autonomous technologies and connected technologies. Put in an industry already disrupted by the journey to zero emissions, COVID, and macroeconomic challenges, these are significant mixers in a very potent cocktail. The speed to autonomous travel is greatly overhyped. We will not be driven around in level 5 passenger cars anytime soon. There is a route to level 4 in increasingly challenging missions over the next decade. I think it's fair to assume that over the next couple of years, we will see robo-shuttles and taxis working in suburban environments. Progressively, by the middle of the decade, rolling into geo-fenced urban environments. Super dense utilization like London by the end of the decade and into the 2030s before we can talk about ex-urban. In private cars, that timeline will be extended, and it will force a change of use in private cars. Clearly, cities will remain as the dominant driver of miles traveled through to 2030. Growth comes in South Asia, Europe, and China, with approximately 70% of the global miles driven being in an urban setting. Ripe there for the advent of the autonomous car, but more importantly for the pod. A new segment of mass transportation that in percentage terms will grow quickly in Europe, but also in China and cities in East Asia. Cities like Frankfurt, London, and Singapore will experience this shift to shared autonomous pods as we travel towards 2030. In consequence, if we consider all forms of autonomy from level 0 through to robo-taxis, we can predict that perhaps 70% of global sales in 2030 will be thus equipped. Other forms of public transport will change too. Expect buses to go 100% EV in the near future, especially those in the cities. It's that challenge that tempted me to Optare. I wish to lead this change in the democratization of clean transportation, and I'm excited that I'll be doing it hand in glove with Optare's Indian owners at Ashok Leyland. If local governments are looking to dramatically reduce asthma-promoting particulates in cities, then there should be no hesitation in changing the world's urban bus fleets and taxi fleets to BEV. Battery electric vehicle technology today drives a better TCO, or total cost of ownership, than diesel, and is already capable of serving almost every mission of an urban bus. If the policymakers have the will, then the industry already has the way. COVID-19 has had a major impact on the world, but about its only benefit has been a remarkable worldwide reduction in ambient air pollution. These decreases are so great that they can be seen from outer space. In northern India, air pollution is at a 20-year low, and concentrations of fine particulate matter in New Delhi have fallen by more than 50%. In Europe, nitrogen dioxide concentrations have fallen by 40% and PM 2.5 concentrations by 10%. In New York and Los Angeles, PM 2.5 concentrations are 25 to 30% lower than concentrations from the same month a year ago. According to the Lancet, ambient air pollution is responsible for more than 5 million deaths annually. Deaths caused by heart disease, strokes, lung cancer, diabetes, pneumonia, and even premature birth. COVID-19 related improvements in air quality translate into fewer deaths from pollution related disease. Thus, cleaner air is estimated to have saved 11,000 lives in Europe in April 2020 and 77,000 lives in China in January and February. These great gains show that cleaner air is possible. We might be very close to a tipping point, a massive global transition away from fossil fuels to clean, non-polluting renewable energy. The development that has brought us to this point has been the unexpected rapid growth of wind and solar power over the past decade. Between 2010 and 2020, the proportion of electricity generated globally from wind and sunlight increased by more than 4 times, from 4% in 2010 to 18% in 2020. At the same time, renewable energy sources have become more cost effective than non-renewable energy sources. Since 2010, the cost of generating electricity from solar cells has fallen by 81%, onshore wind by 46%, and offshore wind by 44%. If major governments choose to direct their post-COVID-19 recovery investments towards wind and solar power and away from fossil fuels, this transition will move more quickly. I may argue that this terrible pandemic and its consequences have given a clarity of vision and a unique opportunity to control air pollution, reduce inequality, save lives, and begin to heal the planet. Green energy has come a long way, but still accounts for less than 1/5 of global electricity. Targeted investment post-COVID-19 could catalyze transition with breathtaking speed. But we need to redesign cities and the way that we move people and goods. Public transportation must become more available to more people and be safe and affordable. And the motor industry must move quicker in the decarbonization of our industry. Not simply net carbon zero for the vehicles themselves, but across the entire value chain of its suppliers, right the way to the end of vehicle life. COVID-19 has brought our world to a point of crisis. Now, we have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to emerge from this crisis and to build a cleaner, healthier, and a more just world that we can deliver with pride to our children and to our grandchildren. As for our beloved auto industry, well, it's on a pathway to net zero carbon emissions, and thus it's an industry in the flux of change. An industry that for the first time in 100 years is seeing new players. We see turmoil, we will see bankruptcies, and we will see collaboration and consolidation. But for the countries and the companies that grasp the change, who invest in the change, and who internalize the new intellectual property from that change, they will be the winners that serve our planet for the next 100 years. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why I love this industry. Thank you. Dan.
Wow, thank you very much, Andy. It was so fascinating, everything you said.